Fiona Harvey has been one of the biggest talking points over on this YouTube channel, and because of Baby Reindeer, she's become one of the biggest talking points in the world at certain points. And I wanted to get into the head of Fiona Harvey without meeting Fiona Harvey. So I spoke to a therapist who basically gave me a rundown of who Fiona Harvey is, kind of behind the eyes, what she could possibly be diagnosed with, and why she could possibly be the way that she is. Now, I need to stress that obviously this therapist has never actually met Fiona Harvey, and she can only diagnose, or not diagnose, but only base her opinions and her professional opinions on what she's seen in the media. So the Piers Morgan interview, the lawsuits, Richard Gadd's email leaks, and also off of Martha from Baby Reindeer. But we quickly learn that Martha and Fiona are two very different people when it comes to therapy. So here's the interview that I had.
I'm a licensed psychologist and I'm also a content creator. And I really like breaking down some of the psychological aspects of crime and then also entertainment news.
Fantastic. I mean, like that's obviously I found your channel through basically through this Fiona Harvey stuff. Obviously, you know, I mean, everyone's captivated by it. I think more so than just the series itself, because that's what started it all. You know, everyone's intrigued. But now it's blown up into a whole different kettle of fish. And was that where you kind of found your interest? Was it through the show, or was it through the aftermath?
So I found the show first, and right as I finished the show, I saw the Piers Morgan interview, which
Yeah.
almost seemed like the next episode of the series.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I mean, that whole Piers Morgan episode was, I mean, he did phenomenal off the back of it.
Yes.
And I actually thought, like, people gave him like a load of grief for it. I thought he did a pretty good job of interviewing her, and you know, he was pretty cutthroat with her at times when he needed to be. But like, was that when, obviously seeing the show and then seeing her in person, were there like red flags like pinging off, like, or
Definitely some of the things that were said in the interview didn't seem to make sense. And during the interview, things would change. I didn't email at all. I only emailed him a few times and so there were definitely some red flags for me. I wanted to be careful covering Fiona Harvey and really talked about it more on my first video, more from the Martha perspective
yeah,
from the show, because in my personal opinion and with things that I saw, I was concerned that the individual he was interviewing might have some significant mental health concerns. And so I just wanted to be careful. But then she put herself out there more and more, especially with the lawsuit and the public Facebook profile, all of these other things that we've seen. And so that's when I became a little bit more comfortable just speaking in general about things that I was seeing and just concerns. I'm glad that she did make that Facebook profile private and I wish that she had done that and never went on Piers Morgan. That's just me as a therapist
yeah.
saying, I think she kind of opened some of these doors and I don't know that she'll ever see that.
Yeah, and that's something that like a lot of people have said is like, you know, she accuses, and the whole lawsuit bases around her being brought to the forefront by the show. But a lot of people are like, well, actually, if she had never gone public on Piers Morgan, people probably wouldn't care or know who she was by this point. It would have all blown over and it would have died down. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear it from a therapist's point of view that actually that probably wasn't the best kind of move. But I do want to like say before we carry on that we're going to be basing this all off of what we've seen in the media, like so the Piers Morgan interview, the emails that have come forward from the lawsuit, Martha as a character, and then how kind of Fiona marries up with Martha to a degree, because you know, Patrice, you've obviously said that that's how you've approached it so far, and you know, obviously there's lawsuits flying left, right, and centre, and nobody wants to get in the crosshairs of them.
Yep. And because I've never met with her, I've never interviewed her. And so I'm just speaking in general about
Yeah.
what might be happening with an individual like this. I definitely don't know what's happening for her exact situation.
Yeah, exactly. And then obviously, you know, let's go back to the beginning with the show. Obviously, from a therapist's point of view, I watched it as a viewer. I loved it. I thought it was great. You know, this is a true story, all the rest of it. And I was like, wow. And then I just switched it off and turned it away. And that was it. Like, until all the Fiona Harvey stuff blew up. When you watch shows like that, do you switch into therapist mode? Or do you, like, is it hard? Do you have to, like, flick it on and off? Or how do you view it?
So I found the show because clients were begging me to please watch it. Because
Wow.
a lot of people that I worked with, the way that Richard Gadd portrayed stalking is a way that I had never seen on any type of media, because he didn't make one person the villain and the other person the angel. He
Mm.
really seemed to balance. And that's where I was really surprised at some of the things in her lawsuit, because to me, I thought the way that he portrayed Martha, after seeing some of the emails he submitted, he he was like, the Martha character is more agreeable. Is now there were issues. There are definitely issues that came up in the show, but his actual experience almost seems worse
Mm.
than what we saw in the show based on his statement that was submitted to the courts. And as a therapist, I always like watching these things because sometimes this does come up with my clients. And then with my subscribers on my channel, being able to just break down, this is a trauma bond. So the dynamic between them was two broken people that were kind of breaking each other more, and it was very toxic. And he admitted, like in the show, so Donnie, because that's where it's like, this is Donnie's story. So Donnie in the show just goes into how he was kind of drawn to the attention, and when he didn't have the attention, how he felt, and how she made him feel seen and heard. And I felt like some people could identify in that in a way. And I love how male victims have come forward about their experiences as well.
I agree, because like this is something that, like, when I think of or when I thought of stalking to begin with, I always thought of stalking as, you know, the it being the other way around. Like, it's always, you always hear stories about the female being stalked by a male, not vice versa. And to have it from the different point of view and see how vulnerable, you know, Donnie or Richard was at that point was like, wow. And I mean, something that struck me as well was how open he was to being not the, like you say, not the angel, because it's easy to kind of put yourself on this pedestal and be like, I was the victim and have this victim mentality. But actually he was like, yeah, no, I definitely played into it, and I played a huge part in this. And that was like, fair enough.
And just the way that he added in a little bit of comedy, like I thought that it was a show that was beautifully done. And then when everything else fell out afterwards, because I was like you, when it said this is a true story at the beginning, I thought that most of the things in it was going to be true. But then looking back, and other creators have talked about that being an artistic license, that this is Donnie's true story and that this wasn't Richard Gadd's true story. And I think that's where Netflix might get in a little bit of trouble. We'll
Yeah.
see. They might just a little, not, but maybe just a little bit,
Yeah.
because it doesn't seem like she had, Fiona Harvey had an actual conviction. But the actress that played Martha did a phenomenal job, and I do
Yeah.
think she may win awards for it. And for her to come out and say she never listened to any of the voicemails, she strictly built a character around what was written down, that might protect Netflix in a way, versus if
Yeah.
she had listened to Fiona's actual voice or her actual laugh,
Yeah.
or things like that.
I agree, and that's something that you know. This is another part that really intrigues me, is just how it's going to play out, because there's so many variables, and you know, there's a part of me that's like, yeah, maybe like Fiona Harvey was villainized and put out there to a degree, and you know, I sympathise with that because she never asked for it. But then there's
Yeah.
another part of me that's like, but you know, I've seen the emails now, and I'm like, actually, I think Richard Gadd portrayed her in a far not. He could have been so much worse, but
Yes.
I think the way that she was portrayed was quite nice in comparison to the real life counterpart. And it's a bit like, I don't know, I'm a bit on the fence with it. And you know, I don't think that Richard's an angel by any means, because he's clearly got his own issues and he admits to that. And but you know, looking at it from a therapist's point of view, where do you sit with the character? Let's start with the character Martha, because we've, you know, it's clear that these are two very different people based off of real life and the show. Where were you sitting with Martha? What would you, if she was to sit in front of you, because she's a fictional character, I think we could say this, like, what would you diagnose her with?
And so there is a delusional disorder called eromania, where a person has this delusion that they're in a relationship with somebody that they are not in a relationship at all.
Wow.
And so that's where, and I did a little bit of research, and another psychologist had kind of found a similar thing, because she took him giving her a cup of tea not just as like a nice gesture, but this means you want me, and
Yeah.
if you don't want me, that means that you are. And she was, the language that Martha would use would get very derogatory, and it would get very, and it would kind of push some of his buttons. I thought the character Martha was very emotionally manipulative, where she would kind of use her emotional state to get what she wanted. And that has a lot of people leaning towards a borderline personality disorder diagnosis, especially with just that catatonic state at one point and these emotional ups and downs, which also made people kind of think about, could there be some bipolar disorder? And really, without actually sitting with a person, it may be difficult to parse out some of these things. If I was sitting with this person, I would guess that they likely had some trauma in their childhood. And I always say that doesn't justify behavior, it just kind of helps me understand,
Mm.
because I think each individual person is responsible for their own healing and making sure that they don't inflict harm on others. And I did think that the Martha character could pick up on Donnie's insecurity, and at times she would feed his ego, and then at times she would withhold that and intentionally be berating and demeaning and say really, really harmful things to him.
And what would the purpose of that be? Would it be to like almost like have him on a tender hook and just keep reeling him in, kind of thing, or what's the like psychology behind that?
And his character seemed to be more comfortable with harm than appreciation, and because it seemed like when he was getting love and affection, that sometimes that would be hard to take,
Mm.
but almost this, that toxic part, because his self-esteem was so low and he was dealing with unresolved trauma, that 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 chaos was more comfortable versus a safer, healthier relationship.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. And what about, like, obviously you kind of touched on Donnie there.
Mhm.
How obviously he in the show he goes quite in depth about, you know, having struggles with his sexual identity. Identity is just a bit of an identity crisis, I suppose.
Mhm.
And then, you know, being not like struggling with being able to come out to his parents, and then actually the acceptance. And it was quite a wholesome moment, that scene.
Yeah.
What, where would you, if he was sat in front of you, how would you like diagnose his character?
And he really showed a lot of symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And there can be this reenacting trauma where a person goes through something, and in a way to resolve it, they might put themselves in similar situations over and over, and that's not healthy. And when I'm working with somebody, we identify, is this healthy, or is this unhealthy? And when a person has experienced negative life events or SA, sometimes that can confuse things, but it doesn't direct one person in one particular way or another. Uh, I don't know if Donnie as a character, if he would be able to say, did he have some thoughts and feeling, like, did he have some unresolved masculinity prior? or did he have a very toxic view of what masculinity was, what it meant to be a man, what it meant to be attracted to another man, and how he might explore that safely? And for him to be violated and to have those negative experience, that was probably very, very confusing. And that dysfunction showed up in his relationship with the just a therapist. Like, that was so
Mm.
odd to me
Yeah,
that
yeah.
he connected with a therapist that was trying to give him advice, and he was not listening at all. But he couldn't be honest with himself or with others openly, except
Yeah.
for in his writing. It seemed like he could put it all on the page, but he couldn't have that same authenticity in his real life.
And would that be classed as a form of therapy? You know, his writing, like him kind of expressing himself through his plays and through his writing. Would is that, if it's like something they can do? Is that something that you would encourage, or is it like you would rather they actually expressed it in real life?
I would guess that he's likely done some real therapy too, because the way that he told the story, for me, it seems like a person that's healing and that is on a healing journey, especially the way that it ended. And he was able to control that.
Yeah.
And in real life, we don't get to control. We don't get to get the apology necessarily. We might not have the person actually convicted, or so sometimes those things don't happen. So sometimes creatively, people take that license to get that resolve, that closure that they might not get in real life. And so as a therapist, I always just like to say, is it making you feel better or worse? Is this healthy or unhealthy? Because there can be unhealthy expression. So I think him going back and forth with Martha, that was definitely unhealthy. And that was driving that self-deprecating, I don't deserve it. It was feeding that part because he knew what she was and
Yeah.
yet couldn't cut it off. And I like that they showed the difficulty of that, because sometimes people say, why don't you just leave?
Mm.
Why don't you just let it go? And he beautifully just explained and showed how when somebody's hurting, it can be hard to get help and support from the police, to get help and support from friends and family. There can be shame with coming out and sharing those things. I thought it was beautiful, and I don't know that that was his father's true story, but then the father disclosing to him
Yeah.
what had happened and them having that moment. I thought that was kind of, things came full circle
Yeah.
in the show for me.
I agree, and you say, like that was just a beautiful moment when his father came out and explained what had happened to him. It was almost like, you know, trauma bonding, and it was like probably like leveling up their relationship, which was just, it was like it gave you chills when you heard about it and stuff. But yeah, so obviously the show happens, things happen. Fiona Harvey then comes out, Piers Morgan. You know, you've said that there were a few moments in that where there was like a lot of contradictions within the interview itself, but then as we've gone further down the line, just it's kind of snowballed. Um, what did you like? What, as a therapist, looking at that, did you see Fiona Harvey and think, like, even though she said that she wasn't Martha, but then said she was, it was a bit confusing. Did you look at it and be like, yeah, you're showing some similar traits potentially?
There were some things that were said. So the way that Fiona talked about him not being masculine and his sexual identity, the way that she talked about him was similar to what I saw in the Martha character. And then her need for attention and praise, because at some point I thought she wanted more money from the Piers Morgan show
Mm,
after, and that she got really upset
yeah,
about how big everything got.
she did. Yeah,
And and then I think, and just from what I saw, because she said she'd never watched the show, I don't believe that. I don't
nah,
believe that.
nah. She knew a lot about the show to have not watched the show. Yeah, you're right, because in the Piers Morgan interview, apparently they offered her £250 to come
Yeah.
on, which she accepted. She did the interview, it blew up, 14 million views later, huge popularity. And then she apparently demanded £1 million from Piers Morgan and called the £250 a pittance and started slating Piers Morgan and all the rest of it. And it was a bit like, whoa. And obviously the lawsuit then came out of $170 million, and then it was just like, there's the true intention kind of thing. Um, if Fiona and Martha sat in a room together, would you give them the same diagnosis, looking at everything across the spectrum? Would you give them the same diagnosis, or do you think there's a little bit of differentiality between the two?
I'd like to bring in the other people that have come forward
Oh
and
yeah.
said that they have had experiences with Fiona, which made me more comfortable saying there does seem to be this disconnect with reality
Mm.
of her perception and other people's perception, where she'll say, I walked away from this job and the person's like, she was fired.
Laura Ray,
Where
yeah.
she will say, they were so inept. They couldn't, like, I was so amazing. They just couldn't handle it. And then they're like, no, like, she was literally giving clients like other competitors information, like, and just that disconnect where, so it's normal for us to maybe see two things a little different, but
Mm.
this is completely different and in a way that always makes her seem grander than what she really was. And so that's where with the Martha character, you got some little bits of like narcissist type traits, but when Fiona Harvey and with the other things that people have said and with the way that she's come forward and the things that she's done, because from what I've seen, I don't think she thinks she did anything wrong.
No. Yeah. And that's terrifying, considering everything that's come forward.
And that lack of insight, as therapists, we talk about a person's prognosis, their ability to change, and insight is often the very first thing. Like you have to acknowledge that I have a problem.
Mm.
And if I was working with somebody like Martha or Fiona, the first step would be, do you notice all of these breaks in relationships? Because I think Martha and Fiona would blame everybody else and not see anything wrong with any of their behavior. And so the first step would be, can we see a pattern? And then I would get fired. Like that's what, like, so often people with those types of traits don't stay in therapy long
Mm.
unless it's court ordered, because once the therapist pushes a little, they often get
Yeah.
upset or they don't respond to those boundaries
Is
that are set.
is that because you challenge their mindset and you challenge their their aspect or vision of reality? It's like, from the outside looking in, you've got Laura Ray, who you said you walked away from, but she actually fired you. Maybe you could have even if you had the paperwork in front of you, she would probably still contest it.
Yeah.
I mean, that would make someone like her particularly difficult to work with. Where, like, how do you tackle someone like that? Obviously, imagine she doesn't walk away and she gives you the full extent of your time. How would you go about trying to get someone to understand their ways?
And so sometimes you can use the actual therapeutic relationship, things that are happening in the room,
Right.
because the therapist will probably do something that upsets them, or will say, remember how when I asked you to please not call after 10 p.m. and you continued to do that, like let's talk about that behavior and how that makes other people feel.
Ah.
Because I don't think she considers like the feelings of others at
Yeah.
all.
Is that just like through a lack of empathy, or is it that like because I don't know, would that be like nature, would that be nurture? Like obviously that would be something you'd have to dive into in therapy to see if there was
Mhm.
any childhood trauma, I suppose. But you know in a case like Fiona, where would you see her kind of sitting? Would it just be like she can't develop empathy? Because I know people personally who
Yes.
literally love themselves. They love everything they do. It has to be about them. Anything that happens, it has to be made about them, um, even if the situation is about someone else. So, and I know that person just can't physically love anything but themselves. Do you think that might be the case for Fiona, or?
And I'm surprised that there appears to have been situations that have happened that just it hasn't changed the behavior.
Mm.
And when things have been the same over long periods of time, often behaviors get harder to change because people become more rigid.
Mm.
And I would also be concerned sometimes, is there this obsessive need to be rigid and to only see things this one way? So sometimes people can protect their ego because if they really saw the impact that they had on others, they would get extremely sad. They would
Mm.
get to the point where they might have, really harmful thoughts towards themselves. And so sometimes that inability to see it can be protective. And we'll never know exactly what's happening there, but those are some of the things that come to my mind.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, it makes total sense. And then, you know, if we fast forward through the timeline, obviously a lot of things have come out. She's going on all cylinders on this lawsuit against Netflix. Were you surprised to see? Obviously, I know the lawyers handled the initial complaint that went to the courts, but um, have you read that court document that the initial? Yeah. So, were you surprised to see jibes against Richard Gadd personally, or do you feel like, because obviously from I mean, I personally wasn't surprised because obviously she's got this vendetta against him or this agenda or whatever, but being it that it was written by lawyers, do you think, based off of what you read, she might have had a say in what was put in that complaint, or?
And I think there was enough in the show where anyone might throw those things in there, but to me, it kind of goes against someone's argument of you defamed me when it's like I was talking, like I said these things about myself too. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't I like I only talked about what you did and I didn't talk about what I did as well. The American court system works a little different, and that's where I'm not sure how this will play
Yeah.
to an American jury, especially with just how bad some of this is. I could see somebody, maybe like the conviction part. I could see that possibly being something that that people got hung up on, and that this is a true story at the beginning. I can't see it getting the 170 million. I
No.
just I
No.
just can't see it getting anywhere near that. And that's where I honestly wondered, did they think Netflix would just settle?
Yeah.
Because Netflix has settled other situations. And with this one, I'm so glad because the allegations are like of what Fiona allegedly did,
Yeah.
and that Richard Gadd really, to me, so for me personally, and I'm acknowledging my bias, that I view him as the person that's they were both victimized, I think, but like his was to for me watching the way that it was portrayed was a lot worse. And even the emails, and we'll probably get to that, all the things that he released, I don't think it would be fair to him for her to get millions of
Yeah.
dollars because she didn't private her Twitter and
Yeah.
because she went on Piers Morgan.
Yeah.
And
I agree, and to look at it from that point of view, like, does she deserve that much money? And also, what would happen if she was to get, let's say the legal team take like a third of it or whatever, and she's left with $100 million. Like,
so Laura Ray said she's gonna sue her.
yeah, I did see that, but obviously, like, that's terrifying to have someone who's that, we've seen the evidence now from Richard. That's terrifying, and to think that she could have that much money, she'd almost become untouchable because she could just buy her way out of any situation. Like, surely that'd leave her, let's label them as victims, Laura Ray and
Yeah.
Richard and other people that haven't come forward, that'd leave them terrified.
And then I think even for new people, of would you then do this again?
Yeah.
Because I think people can learn from things, and so I don't know what the lesson would be. And so that's where I'm not sure what's going to happen with these cases moving forward. I thought it was telling that she didn't sue Richard. She
Yeah.
only sued Netflix.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that because I thought that with how she feels towards Richard, I thought he would be the top name on that lawsuit.
And I wonder if the lawyer knew that there might be some truth to some of this,
Mm,
because if they did sue him directly, he would have more motivation to come forward with everything that he had.
yeah.
And he still did, even with not being named in the lawsuit, he still came forward with whatever could help explain why he told the story the way
Yeah.
that he did.
Yeah, and obviously watching Richard's response to the courts and the emails involved, like we've already said how she's seems far worse in person than in the show, and Richard actually did a nice thing by not betraying her in that way. I mean, the things that were racial, she openly admits to being racist. You know, there was the stuff about the babies and the, you know, the disgusting behaviors there, and it's just like, whoa. And, you know, as a therapist, you see that, like, what's your reaction at that point? Like, considering up until that point, you had an idea of Fiona Harvey. Obviously, did that change anything, seeing those emails? Did it just solidify all that you thought, or what was your thought
Yes.
process?
It made me very concerned about all just what an individual in general. Now, some people, they get power behind the keyboard and they'll write things and say things that they
Yeah,
won't do or say in person. So I'm very aware of that, but that was just very concerning. And the obsessive nature of it was from what he portrayed, from what he said, and from what I read, it was very concerning to me. And it really made me more, and not that people have to choose a side, but it really made me more on the side of Netflix,
yeah,
especially him explaining that multiple people had been identified as possibly being her, and she was the one that came forward and said it. That she opened the door to a lot of this, and really, without even thinking of the things that could come forward and that could ruin and damage her reputation even more. So I feel like those emails for me were worse than what I saw in the show.
100%. 100. I thought it was bad enough, and then I saw the emails, and I was like, oh, we didn't even scratch the surface with her. Like, this is bad. But you know, obviously, that's kind of where we're at with the whole situation, and it's actually been really insightful to chat with you and get someone with your kind of profession's ideas. Obviously, you do this over on your YouTube channel, about just all sorts of different topics and cases. So where can people find you to continue like learning and exploring this side of everything?
Thank you so much for having me. I am at Dr. Patrice Berry across YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, and I'm really thankful to be here.
Oh, well, honestly, thank you for taking the time to chat with us. So there will be links in the description down below, so be sure to go and check it out. It's well worth your time, and just how insightful these things can be. But yeah, thank you so much again. I found that so enlightening because the whole thing was just absolutely fantastic to listen to. It was intriguing. It answered a lot of questions that I had about the whole situation. But if you want to check out Patrice Berry, there will be links down in the description. Go and give her a follow because honestly, her YouTube channel is filled with fantastic behind the scenes deep dives of all of this kind of stuff. You know, from all different pop culture topics. So yeah, be sure to go and give her a follow. If you have gone on to enjoy this video, be sure to drop a like on the video. And until next time, I'll speak to you later. Peace.